Fantastic. Let's jump right into today's discussion. And as you can see, we have a packed agenda here today, covering a wide range of things you need to know about AI and considerations for managing data privacy in the age of AI. Before we dive into the meaty stuff around the legal landscape, usage considerations, and practical management strategies, let's first take a look at what AI is, the different types that are out there, and some use cases. And so, what is AI? There's a lot of definitions out there. The EU in the AI Act took a wide approach at defining it. Hey, Dave, do you want to sum it up for us? Exactly what is AI from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And from my perspective is I'm a lawyer, right? And so I'm a computer scientist. And so when I think about what is AI, it's principally for me grounded in, well, how is it defined in the law? So we have the EU AI Act definition there. We also have the Colorado AI Act definition, which is very helpful. And for both of those, they're grounded in a machine-based system or software that is generating some sort of output. And how does that work? Well, it's based on large data sets that are identifying patterns. We'll talk a little bit more about that, Gen AI and some of the different models, but that's principally how I'm thinking about it.
Okay. And yeah, and you raised a really good point. There are a lot of terms that, get thrown around when discussing AI. Let's go into our next slide because you'll definitely see a lot of those terms there. And so, sometimes it gets confusing to know what is what. And so, what this slide helps do is show that kind of high level taxonomy of the different key terms, discussing AI in a hierarchical way. And, it definitely looks like an onion, starting out with kind of the umbrella term of AI and then, going deeper in. So what's next here, Dave? How should
Yeah.
we be thinking about this?
This is a graphic from a blog that I highly recommend. I found it very helpful. And Tobias, who put this together and who has the blog, he is a data scientist. And so I think he does a very good job of helping conceptualize these different terms. AI is the umbrella term, and there are two main research areas. And as you see on this slide, the next sort of layer within the onion is narrow AI, the other one being strong AI or artificial general intelligence, which we'll sort of set to the side and isn't really what we're focused on here today. So narrow AI is task-specific systems. And you get down to generative AI, a term that I think that we've all heard a lot about. That's a branch of deep learning, and that's aiming to create or modify original content. It's using statistical patterns to generate similar content based on those patterns. We'll talk more about examples of Gen AI. Then one layer inside of that, we have our LLMs, the large language models. They don't have a true understanding of our language, right? I mean, they're just responses based on patterns that the has been observed, and they're trying to complete text inputs by predicting what comes next based on a given context. Some have referred to it as like sort of smart, really smart autocomplete. If you think about your texting on your phone. Getting really into the heart now there, into the center of this, you have GPT-4, which is a proprietary LLM from OpenAI. And then based on GPT-4, you have ChatGPT, which is a OpenAI web application. So that's how we move from the umbrella term into some of these other terms that you've heard people talk about when they talk about AI.
And so really gets down into kind of the capabilities of each of these different types. Is that one way to put it, Dave?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The capabilities as you get in, as well as just sort of understanding the branches, even at that from narrow AI, right? I mean, this is all a sort of a subset of that, these task-based systems.
Yeah, and and I think that's a really good kind of way to kind of go into a little bit deeper into narrow AI, which on the next slide, we provide, some examples. It's probably the type of AI that we're most familiar with. As Dave mentioned, we do encounter this one in our day-to-day lives. So for example, like the Netflix recommendations on what to watch next, Siri on your iPhone, Alexa, or, facial recognition to unlock your phone. Also, language translators, chatbots, email spam filters like the one in Gmail are other examples of narrow AI that you may encounter. And, and as Dave had already, highlighted, it's designed to do a specific task, and it's following a set of pre-programmed rules, or, it learns patterns from the data that's trained on. And it's not able to perform tasks outside of its design scope. So, unlike, strong AI, which is able to do, learn and do a variety of tasks, narrow AI doesn't really understand, or is able to apply its knowledge across a range of tasks. It's designed to do what it's trained to do, and it relies on a large quantity of data to learn. So data quality is important to in training narrow AI, and to help reduce bias. And this type of AI, as we all encounter it, does have many benefits, and it's used to for tasks that are repetitive, time consuming, or even dangerous for humans. And its ability to process large amounts of data efficiently and effectively reduces the amount of errors and increases worker safety, especially in manufacturing and transportation industries. You'll see a lot of uses of narrow AI, to help it, make the work environment safer for workers. And while there's a lot of benefits, there's also risk, including the introduction of bias, lack of model explainability, reliability, and safety, self-driving cars, for example. And there's ways to mitigate those risks, such as conducting risk assessments, which we'll be discussing a little bit later in our presentation. But, narrow AI is, pretty much what we see everywhere. And Gen AI is somewhat a form of that, and it's really made an impact in the last year, especially in how we work and create. Um, Dave, on the next slide, you want to talk about some of the common uses of Gen AI that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully this helps. I mean, I think that most people on this have heard some of these different terms. And so hopefully sort of this categorization is helpful as you think about, well, what all is out there with Gen AI. So Gen AI overarching category, large language models, examples like Gemini, um, which is Google's LLM, ChatGPT, OpenAI's LLM, Llama, Meta's LLM. Um, Other examples, music generation. There's some different applications out there that are generating music. Code generation. I think GitHub's Copilot, maybe most common people have heard about. Amazon has Code Whisperer, and then finally image generation, Dolly and Midjourney. And also, I mean, I guess worth noting here, like, I mean, some of these are sort of, blending, right? I mean, you could do some code generation within the LLMs, um, but those are the how you can categorize these different products that you've heard, or maybe you've used yourself and tested out.
Yeah, and it's amazing what you can do with generative AI. I was reading the other day on, now there's ones that through simple prompts can create a presentation for you. There's one out there that Google is doing that. You can input text and it'll create a podcast. So it's pretty amazing what you can do with generative AI. It's um pretty definitely has changed, how we think about how we approach our work. And, and there's definitely a number of other use cases for AI. And, on our next slide, Lindsay, do you want to kick us off with going through some of these?
Sure. So Dave has mentioned some of them. So code generation, developers find this as a useful tool where the AI tool can help with code completion and can also help with code prediction. So there are machine learning algorithms in some of these models that can learn from the code that you write and then do things like predict the next line of code or suggest a code. And this is based off of how it's learned how you're coding. There's also, you can use tools like generative AI to help you get started on writing projects. So if you're drafting any type of document and you maybe just, need some help there, you can get some prompts from it. You can also use it to revise what you've already written. So we use that often too. If I've written something and I'm not quite sure, is my audience going to understand this because maybe I'm talking over here and they need to be over here, you can use tools to kind of help smooth out that language or put the written text into a more customer friendly language. And then we are seeing marketing teams using AI tools to generate images and designs for these marketing purposes. It's a really helpful tool for that. And as a researcher, as I said, there's a popular use of AI too. If sometimes you just kind of need to get started, if you need a prompt, you can, if you've been asked by your company as a privacy professional to research something and give a report or let them know on it, and maybe you just don't know where to start or you don't know kind of how to start thinking about it, you can use an AI tool. It's a good way to get you started, and then you can start digging into the meat of it and do your own research and check it for accuracy and things like that. Financial forecasting, I haven't myself seen a lot of examples of this, but AI tools are used to automate those financial predictions. So it's based on information parameters that you have set for the tools, and then it kind of like code completion, it can kind of take that progression further. And so Daniel, I'll turn it over to you to see, do you have anything further you'd like to add on these use cases?
No, I mean, one thing I'll say, I agree with all of that. I will add that use cases are ever growing. I think some of you in the audience, and I'm sure the panelists are aware that 2025 has been hailed as the year of agentic AI, which incorporates some of the use cases that you see here. Essentially, when we're thinking about AI agents, I should say as a primer, we're talking about complex AI systems, typically those that incorporate large language models that are able to complete complex long-term tasks and typically decide with autonomy how they want to accomplish that particular task. So there's a lot less hand-holding in that respect in terms of how the AI system gets from A to B. There are various use cases around this. One of the popular ones that I see a lot of articles talking about is making restaurant reservations, booking hotels, essentially giving lots of the grunt work that you may give to, I don't know, an intern, away to an AI system. I would never treat an intern that way, for the record, as I'm online. But I just say this to illustrate that we're not dealing with static use cases here. As AI systems continue to evolve, so will the use cases.
Awesome. That's great. Definitely would love to have AI be my personal assistant. And as companies are looking to AI to improve efficiencies, and especially where they're having to do more with less, what are some of the key things that they should be considering when looking to integrate AI into existing processes? Lindsay, you want to give us your thoughts on the next slide here?
Yeah, so there's lots of considerations when using AI, one being IP protection. So understanding where the information that's being collected is coming from. So the information that you're using to train your AI model, understanding just, exactly the origins of that, the sources of that data, and whether you're allowed to have that information and whether you're allowed to use it in the way that you plan to use it. Data privacy. So Daniel and I will talk a bit more about that in coming slides, but essentially anytime an AI model uses personal information, you definitely need to make sure that the processing of that personal information from the time that you collect it until the time that the model makes its outputs and then the business acts upon those outputs, through that whole process, that whole life cycle, you want to make sure that you're complying with relevant privacy legislation. So one of the good ways to mitigate some of these risks is by incorporating your AI practices right into your existing privacy management program. Also, you'd want to make sure that any different types of data that you're using is appropriately protected. So whether it's sensitive personal information or confidential business information. So for instance, if you're using a third-party AI model, it's just about understanding how the information you input into the model is being used and then possibly retained. Accuracy is another big consideration. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but sometimes models, which are based on predictive text completion, they may produce an output that sounds reasonable, but it should always be verified for accuracy, particularly where the sources of training data are unknown to the user. And then you need to consider both emerging legislation, such as AI-specific legislation. There's data protection legislation, but there's other types of laws as well, for instance, copyright law, that may be relevant to the type of processing that your AI model does and what you do with that information. And so, like I said, in further slides, we will talk about that. But I just wanted to turn it to anyone on the panel if they had any further insights on considerations.
Yeah, Dave, from your perspective, what are you seeing, in terms of things companies should be considering?
I mean, with most or maybe all of these, there are examples that we can point to where something did go wrong, and so we should all learn the lesson from others. I mean, whether it's the attorney filing a brief with cases that don't exist, and were based on hallucinations, or and not this didn't involve AI, but or like the FTC ordering that as part of a settlement agreement that an algorithm be destroyed because the algorithm was developed with personal data that was not collected in a way where the person gave consent for the data to be used to train that algorithm. So we should certainly learn from and a lot of these are exactly that, sort of takeaways from the ways that others have learned the hard way.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point too, Dave, in terms of understanding the obligations that are associated with the data that's being used to train the model. Because the data protection laws still apply, especially if you're needing to use personal information to train the model. And and I think that is a key risk and consideration that companies need to factor in as they're looking to deploy AI in their solutions. What type of data is being used to train it. So there's a lot to consider when developing or deploying AI. And regulators and lawmakers are looking at the risks that AI presents, and we're definitely seeing a lot of activity on this front. So, starting on the next slide, Lindsay, through your day to day, see a lot of different trends. You see all the different things that are going on a regulatory front. What insights can you share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. So there's a lot going on. This slide doesn't really do the globe justice, but from a global landscape, it continues to grow. In 2024, we saw several AI-related frameworks and pieces of legislation emerge. So in the framework department, the OECD AI principles and the NIST AI risk management framework, they continue to be prominent frameworks that are used. And elements, you'll see elements of these frameworks that are used as building blocks in new and emerging frameworks. So these are only a sampling of AI frameworks that are available. There are so many for companies to choose from, and it can be based on your specific needs. So there are comprehensive and industry neutral frameworks. There's sector specific frameworks. There are frameworks that are dedicated to specific elements of AI, such as just looking at ethics or just looking at transparency, or even just a specific technical aspect of AI processing. So not only are frameworks a really good way for businesses to demonstrate their accountability and a compliance with AI principles, but they can really help businesses to focus on how to operationalize an AI program, because they break down the obligations into smaller achievable tasks that the business can then monitor and continuously improve upon through their framework lifecycle. And so they're a very good place to start if you're feeling overwhelmed and you want to understand things from a more operational kind of bite-sized standpoint. And then with respect to AI laws, excuse me, we continue to see the different phases of the EU AI Act come into effect. I will talk about more of that in a minute, but at the end of 2024, South Korea passed its AI Act, and so that is set to come into force in 2026. Also coming into force in 2026 is the Colorado AI Act. So both the EU AI Act and Colorado AI Act focus on high risk processing, while the South Korea AI Act talks about high impact processing. So this is where obligations will apply to AI systems affecting life, bodily safety, and fundamental rights. So this would be processing in the healthcare sector, recruitment and loan activities, and processing involving young children. Those are just a few examples. In 2024 and then carrying into 2025, we're seeing an increase in proposed AI legislation, as well as other types of legislation with AI components that are baked in. So a bill or a law might not be completely about AI, but it'll have an AI component to it. And so we've seen this as being especially apparent in the United States. So President Trump revoked the executive order on trustworthy development and use of AI that was passed during the Biden administration. And then on January 23rd, President Trump issued his own executive order, making it the policy of the United States to sustain and enhance America's global AI dominance. And this is to promote human flourishing, economic competitiveness, and national security. So the action plan that is set out in the executive order gives certain US federal departments and agencies 180 days to develop and submit to the president an action plan on how to achieve this policy. So more to come on this as that action plan gets developed and communicated. And then outside of North America, we continue to see proposed legislation in Asia and Latin America. So there are a number of bills that have been drafted and discussed during 2024, and we are eagerly looking forward to seeing what happens with them in 2025. And then in Canada, the fate of the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, or ADA or IDA, depending how you say it, it's currently unknown, with the Canadian Parliament being prorogued until March. So until further time in Canada, when a new legislative agenda is set, existing federal and provincial privacy law will continue to be used. And so I wanted to include, for your awareness, also unlawful trade practices and unfair and deceptive acts legislation in the US. So although these are not specifically just about, they're not specifically about AI, we're continuing to see these types of laws being used as legal mechanisms to regulate the use of AI in the US. So in 2024, the FTC relied on the FTC Act to preside over AI practices that it thought constituted an unfair or deceptive act. And then also recently, Oregon's Department of Justice issued guidance on AI that specifically called out that misrepresentations and certain other practices involving a business's use of AI would be caught under its Unlawful Trade Practices Act. So it's important to see the legislative landscape a bit more holistically when it comes to AI. So it's not just AI specific legislation, it's not just data protection laws, but there are multiple other laws, including, as previously mentioned, copyright law as well, like that will come into effect depending on the type of processing that you're doing. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just to dive a little bit into the EU AI Act. So the Act entered into force on August 1st, 2024, but its main prohibitions come into effect in phases. So in February 2025, so the prohibitions of AI systems that present an unacceptable risk come into effect. So these would be AI systems involving social scoring, untargeted scraping of facial images from the internet or CCTV footage. And then the next phase of note is August 2025. And this is where obligations for providers of new general purpose AI models go into effect. So this would be like net new models going into effect. And then these obligations would include maintaining technical documentation on the model, policies to comply with copyright law, documentation on how the AI model is trained, just as a couple of examples of obligations that will apply there. And then also at this point, this is when the member states will have appointed which authority will oversee compliance with the Act. So there has been talk that the current data protection authorities will also be the AI authorities. So we'll just have to wait and see if that is the case, but at least businesses will know who their regulator will be. And then the EDPB issued an opinion at the tail end of 2024. So this was regarding anonymous AI models. So I won't get into the whole thing, but the key takeaways from this opinion are that AI models trained on personal data are only considered anonymous if individuals whose personal data was used to create the model cannot be directly or indirectly identified, and that the likelihood of extracting or obtaining personal data from the model is insignificant when you take into account all the means reasonably likely to be used to do that. So the EDPB is saying that the determination of whether an AI model can be considered anonymous must be done on a case-by-case basis. They also talked about legitimate interest as a legal basis for developing and training an AI model. So the board has indicated that it's a three-step balancing of interest test that should be applied. So basically, whether there is a legitimate interest by the controller or third party, whether the processing is necessary, and whether the interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of data subjects are overridden by the legitimate interests. And then finally, the board stated that an AI model developed using unlawfully processed personal data could impact the lawfulness of its deployment unless the model has been anonymized. So this means that deployers of AI models that are not deemed to be anonymous models, they have to conduct an appropriate assessment to ensure that the AI model was not developed using unlawfully processed personal data. And that this assessment should take into account the source of the data and whether the AI model is the result of an infringement of the GDPR. So there's a lot to take in there, but that's the takeaway from the EDPB. The EDPB's guidance was geared towards supervisory authorities, but there's a lot of meaty stuff in there for businesses to take away when they are considering how they're using their AI models that are processing personal data and whether or not they can be considered anonymous. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk about a few emerging trends that we're seeing in our research. So transparency and data minimization have been a focus of late in the AI world. In 2024 specifically, the FTC issued a report on trends that they were seeing with businesses' use of AI. And through that report, it concluded that just updating your privacy policy to indicate changes in data processing is not enough. So transparency's it's not just a compliance box to be ticked. You have to actively inform consumers about your data handling practices, and you have to then honor each privacy commitment that you've communicated to consumers once your data collection begins. So for instance, if you're updating your privacy policy to say that you may use personal data to train an AI model, that's not necessarily sufficient, and it could be considered an unfair or deceptive practice. You have to actively take steps to notify your consumers of the policy change that now says that, like, this is what the change is, that we will be using personal data to train an AI model. And so that they can then decide if they agree or consent to these new changes. Another interesting observation comes out of the Character AI lawsuit. So Character AI is a chatbot service that can generate human-like text responses based on a user's customization. So it essentially lets you create characters with customizable personalities and responses, and uses AI to create believable responses. So in this case, the parents of 2 Texas teenagers are suing Character Technologies, alleging that its Character AI chatbot encouraged their children to commit self-harm and violence, among other things. So I don't want to go into all the allegations, but one of the allegations brings up the concept of dark patterns. So it's essentially this, that the chatbot had a disclaimer that the characters in the chatbot are not real, but the allegation is that the AI characters promote themselves as real people. So this would constitute a deceptive or dark pattern to trick users, especially children, into using the site and interacting with the chatbot in a way that reveals personal data. That's the allegation. So although Character AI informed its users that they were interacting with AI, the AI model itself allegedly contradicted the statement by insisting that the characters were real humans. And I think this is an interesting view on AI transparency, and whether your model practices what the company is preaching. So for that specific case, we'll have to wait and see how the court rules on this notion of a dark pattern. But it's an interesting takeaway for any type of AI that you are using or deploying, to understand what that disclaimer says and making sure that the AI model is acting appropriately and accordingly to that disclaimer. Data minimization is another important focus in the AI context. So putting aside any legal arguments about data scraping or IP infringements for a sec, there are numerous privacy implications if you are collecting too much data. So the idea of data minimization is to only collect what is necessary for the processing purpose. However, if your processing purpose is to train your AI model, such as a large language model, how do you ensure that you are not collecting too much data? So the UK Information Commission actually put it in a really good way. So they said that the data minimization principle does not mean that you either process no personal data at all, or if you process more personal data, you automatically break the law. But instead, the key to data minimization is that you only process the personal data you need for your purpose. So this entails making sure that the data collected is adequate, relevant, and limited to the specific processing need. And if you're designing your own AI, then this is where you would engage risk management processes to identify what data you need and make sure you're only collecting that data. And if you're buying or implementing a third-party system, that data minimization should form part of the procurement process when you're doing due diligence around that. And so once you've identified what data you need, you can start to then determine how you will obtain that data and what legal basis is appropriate for that collection. And as previously mentioned, the EDPB's opinion on when you can rely on legitimate interests for the use of personal data in an AI model will be very helpful when you're developing and deploying AI models in the EU. There's also a lot of quality and accuracy issues with large volumes of data. So we did touch on that a bit already. But this is especially if you've collected kind of nice to have information. So information that you might have collected one day and set aside for a possible future use, which does not fit the data minimization principle, but it happens. But also, like, how do you go back after so much time and determine whether that information is accurate? So this can be challenging too when the data is collected from a third-party source where there's no direct relationship or communication with let's say a data subject if it's personal information. So it becomes really tricky and challenging to make sure that that information remains accurate and up to date. And then finally, as we wait for AI legislation to fully come into force, I just wanted to highlight a couple of examples of where data protection laws are being used. So in Europe, the Italian Garant That's the DPA there. They have not been shy about investigating AI-related complaints under the GDPR. So the grant has kept OpenAI on its watch list since 2021. And so they've recently fined the company 15 million euros for numerous GDPR violations, including a lack of valid legal basis for the processing of personal data for ChatGPT. And then a bunch of other things like the company did not conduct a suitable legitimate interest assessment or data protection impact assessment. They had insufficient transparency, such as the privacy notice was only available in English, and that there was no data protection by design used. And then another company that the grant also was closely following is Foodino. This is a food delivery service. It's similar to Uber Eats. And in its decision, the grant found that the company used automated decision-making to assign scores to drivers based on a number of service parameters. And then they did not afford drivers the opportunity to request human intervention, express their opinions on decisions, or ask for a different decision outcome. And then there were a lot of other data protection issues, such as transparency. They had confusing privacy notices. They had inadequate security, data retention issues. So these are just some examples of how data protection laws and other laws, such as unlawful trade practices, these are all being used to regulate AI practices. So it's just a good thing to have on your radar when working with AI models, that regulators aren't necessarily waiting around for AI legislation to be in full force before investigating any AI-related processing. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Joanne.
Yeah, and those are some great insights, Lindsay, especially on the regulator front. One of the, circling back to some of your comments around transparency and, making updates to your privacy notice, to explain how your organization how companies are using AI, what type of data they're using to train their models. And especially it would be considered a new use of personal information if you decide to use personal information to train your AI model. Are you seeing any initiatives that are, being taken to help make policies more understandable by consumers, especially, with AI being relatively new to the majority of people out there? Are you seeing anything, Lindsay, Daniel, or Dave, on helping making the technology more understandable by consumers?
I can say one thing that I've observed, and that is the advent of nutrition labels, which, as the name would suggest, are these several lines of information pertaining to various AI governance related matters. A few companies have promulgated them, and there's some academic institutions which I believe are working on them as well. They are a step in the direction of increasing transparency with respect to like how an AI system works and how it was created. But right now, these kinds of efforts are definitely in the minority. Most companies have not embarked upon creating nutrition labels, but that is something that we've seen emerge over the past few years, ever since LLMs hit big time.
Hey, great.
I've got one thought on that, Joanne, which is I think that the question of consent, which is sort of involved here, right? Like how do you notify your customers about a change to your privacy policy or your terms of use, and how do you ensure that they're aware and that they're consenting to that? I think the question of consent is an area to watch this year. In Pennsylvania, there's a Supreme Court case this year about consumers agreeing to arbitration when using a mobile application, and sort of how do they effectuate consent. So that's one to watch. And then last year, the Ninth Circuit, in a case involving Google, the Ninth Circuit revived a case about consent and whether a reasonable person had consented to Google's privacy policy. So I think it's kind of baked in there, right? I mean, if you're changing how you're using your customers' personal information and you're notifying them via privacy policy, how do you ensure that you have a defensible position that they were aware of it and that they continue to use the service after that change was made?
Yeah, and that's really going to be key is making sure that people fully understand the nature of the change, um, and thinking through how can some of these projects around privacy policies, especially those around labels, are adapted to address AI. So that'll be interesting to see. Another area we're seeing, especially in California, where the CCPA is now including artificial intelligence, information that's connected with an artificial intelligence system, personal information. So how does that impact individuals' ability to exercise their rights, around access or deletion? It seems quite impossible. Any thoughts on that? Throwing it out to the panel here.
It continues to be a challenge, like from a research standpoint, getting some kind of more operational guidance for our customers. There is some stuff out there, but it reminds me a little bit of when blockchain and IoT first came out. We had this period of like, what about data subject rights, and kind of waiting to see as the technology gets used and absorbed more into everyday life, like seeing how that kind of plays out and how we figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that's it, Lindsay. We're still going to be working to figure that out. Which really is now companies are now needing to think through how do we manage AI risk, and how do we identify it. And I think Daniel, you'll have some thoughts around this. Can you walk us through like one of the ways that an organization can mitigate some of these risks?
Absolutely, I'll certainly try my best. Next slide, please. Cheers, thank you. So what I'm about to share regarding trends and challenges with organizational approaches to AI impact assessments, which is one such way in which companies can identify and manage AI-related risks, comes from a paper that I authored and that FPF published in December of last year. And this paper was the product of research over several months and consultations with over 60 companies, many of whom are our members. Now let's go to the next slide.
Marie, I think we're having an issue with the slides advancing.
That's okay. I'm happy to keep going. So let me talk a bit about what are AI impact assessments and why perform them, because many in the audience may not be familiar with them. Well, it's important to note that with respect to the term AI impact assessments, the vocabulary is all over the place. Some pieces of legislation and regulatory action and company documents don't use the term AI impact assessment. They may use the term AI risk assessment, and there's even one that I saw that calls them AI risk impact assessments. And even amongst organizations and governments which use the same terms, the definitions vary. But as Lindsay pointed out, there is a certain document that NIST produced a few years ago, the NIST AIRMF, which has gained a lot of traction with the AI governance community. And it defines AI impact assessments as those that include tasks such as assessing and evaluating requirements for AI system accountability, combating harmful bias, examining impacts of AI systems, product safety, liability, and security, among others. Now, some of you may be familiar with data protection impact assessments, which are required under certain circumstances by the GDPR and other kinds of data protection laws. While these assessments, DPIAs, are distinct from AI impact assessments, they're often part of the same enterprise risk management process, which I'll talk about a bit later. AI impact assessments are part of AI governance programs, which are the policies and procedures that aim to ensure that responsible development and deployment of AI technologies. Multiple internal teams within a company will contribute to this AI governance program, including the impact assessment, and they may engage with third parties such as model developers and system providers, although as I'll talk about in a moment, that can create all kinds of issues. So why do an impact assessment? Well, as alluded to by a few of the previous speakers, there are a growing number of legal mandates to perform them, such as in the Colorado AI Act, and these kinds of statutory sources for this obligation are growing. But beside legal rationales, organizations may conduct these assessments because they can help build trust in their products and services amongst a diverse group of stakeholders, including members of the public, and they can counter threats to the organization by helping organizations proactively uncover issues such as the loss of IP. So now I'm going to talk about the actual bones that make up an AI impact assessment. Through our research, we found that businesses typically go through 4 common steps when conducting AI impact assessments, including initiating an AI impact assessment, gathering model and system information, assessing risks and benefits, and identifying and testing risk management strategies. I'm going to break each of these steps down into more detail. So starting off at the top, initiating an AI impact assessment. The circumstances that trigger an AI impact assessment will vary based on a variety of factors, such as applicable law, product or service development, and an organization's role within the AI ecosystem, such as whether you're a developer or deployer. These incentives for conducting AI impact assessments may arise at different points in the AI development and deployment lifecycle. For example, an organization may perform an initial assessment during the development phase and one after substantial changes are made to a model or system. Additional assessments may be necessary when the system is deployed in a different context. And then you have the process of gathering model and system information. In order to be able to assess the risk that an AI system may pose, organizations must understand how that system works and was created, and they will engage with a variety of internal and external teams as applicable to do so. The next step is to assess risks and benefits. This essentially means that the reviewers are taking the information about the model or system that they've gathered into account to determine the AI model or system's risks and benefits for a particular use case. And then finally, there's the identification and testing of risk management strategies. Organizations select risk management strategies based on their responsiveness to a specific identified risk. For example, if an organization identifies hallucinations as a risk, the organization will tailor its response to this risk, such as by tweaking the AI's implementation to reduce hallucinations and ensuring ongoing monitoring of outputs for hallucinations. So now I'm going to talk about some of the issues that organizations encountered at different steps in the AI impact assessment process, as well as some of the trends that we observed from the organizations we engage with when they conduct these assessments. And then I'll turn it back to you, Joanne. So when organizations gather model and system information, they typically seek a variety of information, such as details about an AI model's training, use case, capabilities, and more. Organizations, as I mentioned, typically have internal teams, sometimes dedicated to AI governance, and when relevant, seek information from third-party model developers and system providers. However, many organizations have reported to us that they can encounter difficulties obtaining information from these third parties for a variety of technical, organizational, and what I will call miscellaneous reasons, which I'm happy to expand upon if interested. Second, when we're talking about the actual stage of assessing the kinds of risks and benefits that a particular AI system poses in a use case, a growing number of organizations have sought to integrate AI impact assessments into enterprise risk management processes, including those around privacy, such as those established with DPIAs, as I mentioned. And in doing so, they've established updated processes for identifying and monitoring risks related to AI, and they may escalate AI use cases for review, potentially all the way up to the CEO, although based on our interactions with members, that has not occurred yet, but some of them have those processes set up in the event that they need to. However, organizations often find that difficult to anticipate all relevant AI-related risks because of the number of AI risks out there. There was a repository released in the summer of last year that identified 700 plus risks related to AI. There are various issues around surveying AI risks when we're dealing with a system that operates in a dynamic operational environment. All of these things make it difficult to determine how likely a risk is to occur. And finally, when identifying and testing for AI risks, FPF observed that organizations may use both qualitative and quantitative approaches to determine whether risk has been brought within acceptable levels. A variety of factors, however, including the subjective nature of certain risks, the lack of standardized metrics for measuring specific risk, and the indeterminate nature of some AI systems' operational environments can impede these efforts. Seeing as though we only have 6 more minutes, Joanne, I'm going to turn it back to you to have a lively conversation at the end of this webinar.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you for walking us through what it takes to do AI risk assessment. You know, companies have got a lot to think about, and and we covered a lot here. But what are some of the practical strategies companies need to take to manage data privacy, especially in this new AI-powered world? As companies are leveraging AI tools developed by third parties, what are some of the strategies that they can approach with managing that third-party risk, where there's concerns around the third party using the company's data to train its AI model? What are some of the practical strategies that companies can take to manage that in addition to their own use and development of AI? Dave, you want to kick it off here for us?
It looked like Daniel was chomping at the bit.
Daniel.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah.
Oh, happy to. Thanks, Dave. I'll be brief and then I'll turn it over to you guys. But one of the things that we observed is that companies with particularly robust AI governance programs that were engaging with third parties because they were procuring a model from them or a system from them were very intentional about who within that third party they spoke to. There are lots of occasions that we encounter through our research where company A that has procured said model or system will speak with anyone at the upstream third-party company. But the problem with that is that often they'll be put in touch with a business or marketing person or even another lawyer, but who doesn't do AI governance work. And that's no disrespect to them. There are lots of different kinds of lawyers. But the problem that that can create is that upon engaging with those individuals representing the third party, they just won't have the information to provide to you. So I think it's very important for downstream organizations to be very intentional about who they're interacting with at a third party so that they can receive timely and accurate information.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, the other thing to sort of think about is I think there's some similarities in what we went through with GDPR and CCPA in terms of new obligations, relationships between company and customer or vendor. And some of the same sort of lessons we learned I think they apply. And while maybe what's market, we sort of established now in DPAs for data privacy, we may not have that quite yet. But yeah, I think sort of thinking about it through that lens can be helpful with vendor management and usage in whatever sort of role you're sitting in, if you're the vendor or if you're the customer.
So it sounds like it's pretty important for companies to check their contract terms, making sure that, they're embedding any reviews of third-party use of AI and third-party solutions as part of their procurement process. And Daniel, would you recommend, that they include some AI-related questions as part of their vendor questionnaires?
Yeah, no, that actually brings up a really good point, Joanne. And actually, Dave triggered this thought with me when he was providing his excellent insight. Some of the more sophisticated organizations that we interacted with respect to AI governance recognize that, look, AI impact assessments are hardly the only kind of evaluation they have to do with respect to an AI system. For example, DPIAs are pertinent in many cases in this sort of situation as a potential cybersecurity related assessments. And so what some of these companies do is they try to combine different aspects of them together into one enterprise risk management process, so that in addition to addressing various privacy specific questions, they'll have AI specific questions, and they will all be sent to a company's relevant team, such as product, at the same time, so that they don't receive duplicative questions, which just from an internal politics point of view is not good, because that typically engenders pushback from internal teams that are at the forefront of developing these technologies.
All right, thank you, Daniel. And with our last minute, Lindsay, you want to throw some parting thoughts out there that companies should be doing?
I wanted to touch base on the employee guidance and training. As myself, an employee of a company and a non-lawyer, just the exposure to AI tools and stuff, and just making sure that you understand if you are the one pushing out the guidance or the one receiving it, that you are completely aware of what your company's stance is on AI, use of AI models, how you are to use it, what kind of data you can use with them if you are, using a third party AI model. I just think it's really important. And I think it's something that often gets overlooked, because so often in this situation we have right now is companies are like, let's, find efficiencies and use AI and this. And I think that kind of gets overlooked. So just like cybersecurity, sometimes, the weakest link, you got to think of that. So making sure that your employees have the proper guidance, policies, and training so that they can go forth and use appropriately.
All right, great. Thank you. And I want to thank you all for joining us today on Data Privacy Day. And I want to thank Dave, Daniel, and Lindsay. You all provided our audience with a lot of great information today.